Now for something completely different. This is what caught my eye. There was a headline that went like this: Phallic cult found in Adriatic cave. Canadian-Croatian archaeologists discover site untouched. This is Dr. Tim Kaiser. He's from the Royal Ontario Museum. And holy Lara Croft, he is our own tomb raider.
Thank you. For the last 25 years, I've been privileged to work in the Balkans, a part of the world that is now, unfortunately, quite familiar to Canadians and to Canada due to its involvement in the recent troubles there. Can we have the first slide, please? Jim? Thank you. That's a fractured, tortured area, and a lot of nasty things have happened there. I have a story to tell, though, that takes you away from that unfortunate reality. The work that I've been doing over the recent little while, I've got my pointer here, is in this part of the Balkans on the coast of Croatia, the Adriatic coast. And I've been working there for some time trying to understand what people have been doing in the Mediterranean and why they've been living there, how they've been living there, and doing, well, really the sorts of archaeological research that doesn't make the movies. It certainly wouldn't encourage anyone to invite me to talk to you, because it's prehistory, it's old, fairly boring stuff. But every once in a while, something special happens. This is the Pelješac Peninsula of Croatia. It's a long, rugged thing, and it sticks out into the Adriatic. It's quite isolated, and nobody's done very much work here, ever, historically, archaeologically, or what have you. I came here a while ago in order to dig a cave that I knew about, and figuring that I would find there the remains of a prehistoric time, the early Copper Age, that's basically unknown to us archaeologists. In order to do that, I had to go up to this cave, and come with me, please. It's hot, it's early in the morning, the sun's not yet crossed the ridge line there, and we have to walk up to this spot right up at the top. I guess my pointer doesn't work all that well. The climb up, Jim, you're going to have to zoom in on this, is difficult at first. We've had at least one broken leg on the way up. When you get there, towards the very top, the ascent becomes quite steep, and there is Lara, but she's Croft, not Croft, BC, before Croft, finding the entrance to our cave, Nakavana. There it is. Inside this cave, which is barely tall enough for you to stand at the entrance, we find the remains of all sorts of both recent and remote activities. And we started digging there in a place that we were pretty confident would give us the sorts of information about its time between 3000 and 4000 BC. We started digging down. It went fairly quickly, even though this is the size of tool that we use for excavation. No backhoes, no shovels, or anything like that. Just a small trowel. And after a few years of digging, you get quite deep. The focus on this isn't great, but what I'd like to show you here is that in the profile that you're looking at, you see faint lines. These are layers of earth, layers of sediment that contain the traces of the past, objects left behind, lost, forgotten, discarded things. And from these, we forensic scientists, archaeologists, try to put together a story about the past. Each of these layers is like a page in a book. Turn the page, we start up at the top at the most recent stuff, and that belongs to the late Iron Age, the time of around the Romans and the Greeks, when in this part of the world there were a people called the Illyrians who lived here. Below that, we have some Bronze Age things. Still further down, the Copper Age, which was what we were looking for. And below that, the Old Stone Age. Now, it kept on going. It was really a fantastic site. But that's not why I'm here. The cave itself was relatively small. You know, the whole thing is no bigger than this stage at first. About this wide, and not any deeper than the back of this thing. And you can see the back here. The ceiling curves down, it meets the floor, and that's it. Well, One of the things that we've noticed in the past in exploring other caves is that through the actions of animals or humans or other sorts of interventions, objects will sometimes move from one spot and they get displaced. And some of the larger things get hidden, and not intentionally necessarily, but nevertheless preserved and cached in these small cracks and crevices at the edges of the cave. So it always makes sense to go pull away a few rocks and see what might be there. You might find a larger piece of pottery that will be a little more informative than some of the tiny little scraps that we find. One of the things that I'd noticed as well is that we didn't occupy this cave alone, we archaeologists. There were also some bats that would fly in every day and fly out as soon as we would arrive, and I wondered where they were. I didn't see them. So we started to look towards the back of this thing. And if there were more light in the cave, you'd be able to see this picture a little bit better, so I've got to show you what we're looking at. We're looking at me. And those are my feet. Right here, that's my butt, and my headlamp is up there, illuminating something. I started to pull away these rocks. This is not a job for the claustrophobe. And I started to go into something that was really no bigger than this. Get underneath, like that, and slide in. And I was delighted because, sure enough, in there, I find pottery, prehistoric pottery, hidden away, big pieces of it, and I was quite excited. My face doesn't show it here, but I was. At the same time, I was also a little nervous because this very dark, narrow space. The stalactites, the things that drip from the ceiling, were right on my head. There was no space at all. And this thing kept going. It sloped downward, downward, and downward. The farther I went, the farther it went, and the more nervous I got. You're not supposed to admit to this sort of thing, I guess, but I was. This is what I saw at the end. All of a sudden, I could stand up. I could stand up in a way that I hadn't experienced for months. In front of the cave, I was always crouched over, banging my head. In the back, well, there was lots of headroom, and this thing went on and on and on. It was so long, my flashlight couldn't illuminate the back of the cave. For a caver, it was an astonishing moment because cavers always look for parts of caves that nobody's ever been into. And this clearly was a sealed passage. It was fantastic. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience for any spelunker. And it was beautiful. Just absolutely gorgeous. You could tell, or some of us could tell, that nobody had been in here for a very long time. Such a long time that a stalagmitic crust, a crust of calcium carbonate, had formed on the surface and was undisturbed. That takes hundreds, maybe thousands of years. The cave itself, instead of being just this little, you see where it pinches off right here? That's how big we thought this cave was initially. It turns out to be 3 times as large. And in the middle section, the middle chamber, we found this one solitary stalagmite that sat there, stood there, suggestively. Around it, well, it was quite suggestive. And because it was so suggestive, we didn't want to believe what we were looking at. Around it, there were hundreds of artifacts, pottery lying in enormous profusion on the ground, surrounding this stalagmite. This stuff had been lying there for hundreds of years, thousands of years. Take a closer look at it, and we find, well, an enormous quantity. And we find that this pottery dates to the 3rd, 2nd, and 1st centuries BC. This is Greek pottery, made in Greek workshops in Greece, in Greek colonies in South Italy, from around the Mediterranean. Expensive ware. It's the equivalent of the Wedgwood of antiquity. And it's all lying around here in this cave, left behind by Illyrians of the late Iron Age. On some of these pieces, they wrote small inscriptions in Greek. Where did they learn this? Well, the Greeks had colonies not too far away, and they interacted with one another. This is a cosmopolitan period. We had found an undisturbed site, a cave site, a sanctuary site, a place where possibly rituals had been carried out a long time ago. Archaeologists dream about these kinds of moments. So now we're not talking about a once-in-a-lifetime experience, we're talking about an experience that happens once in every, perhaps several lifetimes. Perhaps. So for me, my career is all downhill from here. Archaeologists also have a technical language, just as the astrophysicists do. A moment like this, a big discovery like this, which comes, as always, at the very last day of your project, when you have to go home, when you have no more money, well, our technical term for this is the oh shit moment. What do? To do justice to a place like this requires care. You have to go out there and conserve what we found. So I came back to Toronto and decided that there would be no way of getting governments to fund this. The process takes too long. And with a site like this, the threat for looters was far too great. So I went to the museum and talked to Lindsay Sharp, who was then the director. And he was very encouraging and saw that this was a story that had possibilities, found private money for it. And therefore, I was able to go back this past summer with a much larger team in order to find out what really happened in this site. We dug around this stalagmite, and the excavation took all summer long. We only stripped away a small part of it, but in doing so, in these ever-widening areas around the stalagmite and then in a deeper sounding next to it, we were able to find out something of what took place in this cave more than 2,000 years ago. First of all, Jim, you're going to have to make this image smaller. Thank you. First of all, the stalagmite itself didn't grow there. Somebody picked it up from another part in the cave and put it in one special place, a place where natural light illuminates it. It stands in the middle of the cave, spotlit. Secondly, digging around it and underneath it revealed enormous amounts of pottery of a special, specific kind. Here the trowel is excavating the pots. Here's what they look like when some of the dirt comes away. They've all just been left here. And what are we looking at? We're looking at stemmed ware, cups. The Greeks called these skiphoi or kantharoi, and these things were used for drinking wine. A lot of wine. A lot of wine is being consumed in the vicinity of this big stalagmite that's been placed there on purpose. I won't show you the bones that we found, but they are all small bones of sheep and of goat, kid and lamb, in other words. So people are feasting around here with some of the fanciest gear available in the Hellenistic period, in the 3rd century, 2nd century, 1st century BC, from all around the Mediterranean. Rich goods in the hands of these European barbarians. On some of these pots, they were writing inscriptions to their friends, a dedication. I dedicate this to Heraclides, my friend. But some of the inscriptions were even more telling. I mean, it's really nice when you have a roadmap that shows you where you're going. And this pot does. Faintly inscribed, so faintly that the slide doesn't show it, is the tail end of an inscription in Greek. The last letters read I-T-E-S. It's the last part of somebody's name. Best candidate for that is Aphrodite, goddess of love, yes, but also the goddess of sex. Sitting around this stalagmite, this monument, the Illyrians were drinking wine out of Greek pots, or Greek cups, probably Greek wine, in ways that have been described to us by Greek writers. But we doubt, or I doubt anyway, that all sorts of Greek customs were in fact being followed here. It seems that we have another case of cultural convergence here, in which some cultural items are being appropriated by a native people and being used in their own particular way. Here, where stories can be told, where toasts can be made, boasts can be uttered. And the elite life celebrated. The question of who these people were and where they're coming from also occupied our attention. This sort of investigation is never context-free. Obviously, some people with access to special goods were able to do something in this special place. Where were they coming from? We've done a survey of the area around here and found this hill fort 2 kilometers away. You can see the cave from the top of that hill fort. Surrounding the hill fort are burial mounds, heaps of stone that contain a single chamber, and inside there should be a dead guy. This one's been looted. On top of them, we find pottery identical to the pottery found inside the cave. The connection is very clear. People who lived on and around the hill fort buried their dead around it, also used this cave to celebrate rituals of a certain kind. There's one of these undisturbed burial mounds. The elite guys are inside there. They owe their riches, they owe their possibility to an accident of geography. They sit on a point past which the mariners of ancient times had to sail. If you were in the ancient Mediterranean world and you wanted to get around to certain corners of it, you'd go through the Adriatic. And if you went through the Adriatic, best sailing possibilities take you right past our cave, right past our hill fort. The guys who lived there could look down and they could say to any passing cargo, stop, pay the toll. They call that good business. Other people call it piracy. Go figure. So, in this, we'll get rid of that. From this position, they were able to get a hold of the best stuff of the day. The excavations that I've done there, I think, are, well, they're ongoing. And they show you, I think, something that perhaps it has been obscured. You know, there are a lot of discoveries left to be made, a lot of them. And all it takes is a good question, not necessarily a good idea. Thanks very much. How big is it? It's bigger than this.
Is this for me?
This is for